Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a weekly radio show that appears on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. It also streams live throughout the state at ksfr.org. Today, we're going to be discussing the proposed Santolina development on Albuquerque's west side as it reaches yet another critical decision point on August 16th. I'll be talking with Maslyn Locke, a staff attorney at the New Mexico Environmental Law Center, Norm Gaume, a former director of the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission and an active member of the Middle Rio Grande Water Advocates, and Marcia Fernandez, a retired teacher, mother, grandmother, and community activist. She and her husband have a small farm in the South Valley, which they irrigate with from a small acequia when there's water, an issue we'll be talking about today. She serves on a number of boards of organizations that work to improve the South Valley community, safeguard their water, and preserve agricultural and cultural traditions. We'll get to our guests in just a moment, but first a couple of announcements. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that we are conducting this show on stolen Tewa land, and I want to thank our Tewa neighbors for being such good stewards of the land. We could learn much from their custodial caring for the land, water, and air. They would never come up with a concept of Santolina, I can tell you that. In addition to working on the general election, Retake is beginning to focus on the 2023 legislative session with a Zoominar series focusing on key issues we hope will become bills we will support and initiatives we will oppose. We kicked off the series last month with a discussion focused on gun violence prevention with Miranda Viscoli, co-president of New Mexicans to Prevent Gun Violence, and Janae Martinez, a student activist from Albuquerque. We discussed what might be possible in 2023 by way of meaningful gun violence prevention legislation and how you can help. Later in July, we discussed modernizing the legislature with representatives Angelico Rubio from Las Cruces and Cristina Ortez from Taos, along with activist Rick Ann Bach of Indivisible Santa Fe and Kara Lynch, the co-founder of Legislative Momentum. There's a strong movement among a group of 10 Democratic women House reps to reform the New Mexico State Legislature with longer sessions, more paid staff, and paid legislators. We are the only state that doesn't pay our legislators. We learned why this reform is needed and how differently the legislature could function. You can view an audio-video recording of all of our Zoominars at retakeourdemocracy.org. Just go to the Actions and Events in the banner and click on Actions and Events, where you'll find a link to all of our Zoominars near the top of that page. We're planning a Zoominar on health security for September 13th. That Zoom will feature a panel including Mary Feldblum, who has been leading the health security effort for over 30 years. So if you're ever tired of advocacy, think about Mary. She deserves a statue outside the Roundhouse. 30 years doing this. Joining her will be a representative of the medical profession we have not quite identified yet. This person will speak to the immense administrative hurdles that are part of current medical practice. We'll also have legislative allies Representative Day Hockman Vigil and Senator Jerry Ortiz-Pino, who will be responsible for marshaling the enabling legislation through the legislature. Look for upcoming Zoominars this fall on public power, public banking, and hydrogen development. Go to retakeourdemocracy.org, click on Actions and Events in the homepage banner where you'll find more info and links to register for these Zoominars. You must register to attend. Lastly, I want to remind you that if you're driving around and miss any of today's show, you can watch the full YouTube recording of this show and any prior interview by going to retakeourdemocracy.org and clicking on the Retake on the Radio button on the right side of the homepage. You'll find YouTube recordings of all of our previous shows listed in chronological order. So you can binge watch Zoominars for free. Okay, you got your weekend laid out for you there. Okay, let's dive into our discussion on Santolina. Welcome, guests. I'd like to let our guests introduce themselves. So tell us a little bit about yourselves and how you got involved with Santolina. First Marcia, then Maslyn, and then Norm. Marcia?
Thank you. I got involved with Santolina almost from day one back in August 2013. I work with the neighborhood associations here in Bernalillo County, and I was at the County Planning Commission meeting that August and heard for the very first time the first application that Santolina was on their agenda that first day in August. So it's 9 years now. I listened to the presentation, read the documentation for the County Planning Commission, and red flags just popped up in my head all over the place. And I went back to the couple of organizations I belonged to at the time and just said, hey, I think we have a big something going on. I don't know what it is yet, but I think it's going to be big. I think it's going to impact all of us here in the South Valley, and you all better start paying close attention. So that's, I think I played the role of did the Chicken Little thing that day. I did that for the rest of the year. Took quite a while to get people interested in hearing what the possibilities of what might happen and to become involved. And I had no idea 9 years ago that Santolina was going to take over an enormous part of my life, my time and my energy.
So you were the canary in the coal mine, so to speak.
Yeah, that's why I still periodically sit in on meetings like the County Planning Commission just to keep an eye on what developers are thinking and doing. What does the county think about it? And yeah, I happened to be at that meeting and shocked.
Okay, Maslyn, how did you get involved?
So I started with the law center. I'm a staff attorney at the law center. I've been there for about 2 years and 3 days pretty much. But I got involved in that capacity as a staff attorney. I began working with the Anti-Santolina working group and the clients of the law center maybe 1.5 years ago. So I do not pretend to hold nearly the amount of knowledge on Santolina and its history as Marcia and Norm definitely have. But yeah, so about 1.5 years under my belt of the Santolina.
Okay, Norm, what about you?
Well, Virginia Necochea, who's now the director of the New Mexico Environmental Law Center, came up to me after a Gila, Protect the Gila rally at the Roundhouse and asked me if I would get involved and do some technical analysis. And I agreed to do that. When I went to my first Bernalillo County Commission hearing on Santolina, that was in 2015, I was blown away by the lack of information that was being considered and the utter disregard for the public comments that the commission was receiving. And that motivated me to stand the fight to try to educate people what the truth about this boondoggle is.
Okay, well, we're going to find out about the boondoggle today. All right, Maslyn, let's get our listeners sort of oriented. Some of them may not know what Santolina is all about. Can you tell us what the project is and what's so bad about it?
Sure. So at its core, Santolina is just a proposed master plan sprawl development in the southwest portion of Bernalillo County. It would cover an area of about 13,700 acres of currently undeveloped land on the Southwest Mesa. And you know what's bad about it is a huge question that I actually think might be better answered by someone like Marcia who lives in that area. So I'll just pass it to you, Marcia, to touch on that part.
What's bad about it?
In a word.
In a word?
No.
Everything?
Everything.
I have, as a person I've worked on so many protest things over the years, and I know that people think that we are just anti-everything. I'm here to tell you that the Contra Santolina working group is not anti-development, not anti-growth, not anti-developer, not anti-anything like that. But as I've read the various plans and as they've changed through the years, I've looked and looked and looked for things that I could like about this development, and it just keeps escaping me. The biggest question, the elephant in the room always, is water. This development would require an enormous amount of water, and I'm here to tell you that as I've lived on this little farm here in the South Valley for almost 40 years. Our water right now is currently turned off. Farmers have not had any water since June, and or sporadically since June, and then just the rains. But the question, water just looms in my mind about this development. It is a great big sandy bunch of land that includes sand dunes. It's desert. It's high desert with nothing growing on it but desert plants. And yet the vision, the plans that I've read, the developers have made show all the blue grass lawns and the trees and the hedges and the flowers, the parks, the median strips with their growth. And I know all of that takes water, and I know that our valley does not have the water to support this. And that's where I pass it to Norm, because this is the guy with the actual numbers.
Okay, Norm, you can give us the devastating news on the water situation and why that should be an issue with the Santolina development.
Well, Paul, it's a huge issue. And just going back to the very basics, Santolina is a planned community outside the Albuquerque metro area that would use more water than the city of Santa Fe, more water than the city and county of Santa Fe. But we don't know where the water will come from, and we don't know the cumulative effects of providing that water to this new development. So, just think about where we are here in the desert with climate change upon us and increased aridity in everybody's forecast, much less water in the future, that a new city that uses more water than Santa Fe has been approved without looking at the water. The Santolina land uses, right now the land use is desert. The new land use will be an urban and an industrial and business area. When Bernalillo County approved that land use, they didn't take water use into account, even though their own rules say that they will. I think there's a financial analogy to this water grab. It was like if you wanted to spend a huge chunk of money, and you went to an advisor to see if that was advisable, and the advisor determined that you don't know which count the water is going to come from, or what the effect will be of the withdrawals, or even really how much water is sustainable. I don't think the advisor would tell you to go ahead, but that's the situation we're in. And lastly, Bernalillo County has been telling falsehoods about this from the very beginning. The County Planning Commission's findings at the beginning of the story back, I think in 2015, are blatantly false. They said that Bernalillo County has taken water supply availability and cumulative impacts into account, but they haven't. They determined, despite a record that was presented to them by opposition, Bernalillo County said that water is physically and legally available for Santolina without cumulative effects. It's simply not. For those who follow water, we're using more water in the Middle Valley of the Rio Grande than is legally apportioned to us. We're in debt, serious debt, in our downstream deliveries, and on the cusp of another interstate lawsuit over water. And so this big additional chunk just doesn't make sense from any perspective you look at: water, or the demand for housing, or any other, the finances of the development, any other aspect.
Yeah, that's what I've heard repeatedly. I need to take a quick break here to remind our listeners that you're listening to KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. And it's at times like this, with rampant misinformation on the news and social media, that a station like KSFR is so important. They give you the straight facts, they give you great news, cultural events, music, and shows like this, where you can hear leaders in our state discussing critical issues facing our state. So if you're at home, and when you finish listening to this radio show, if you could go to ksfr.org and click on the donate button and toss them 10, 20, 50 bucks and view it as your donation or as your ticket for admission to some great programming. If you're driving around town, don't try and do that on your phone. Wait till you get home. We want to keep you alive. Thank you, KSFR. There are other, we've talked a little bit now about water and why that doesn't make any sense, but there are other good reasons to reject this development unrelated to water. Marcia, can you lay out some of the issues related to public space, congestion, public health, and waste disposal? It seems that Santolina has a negative impact on every aspect of ensuring a healthy, sustainable community. Is the development purely extractive and focused on developer profit? The public be damned.
As far as I can tell, you've just put it into one sentence. That's exactly what we think. It isn't just about water. It's also about disturbing the desert. I live directly east of the Santolina development, and I'm here to tell you that when the wind is blowing 50 miles an hour from that direction, we can't work outside. You can't open your windows and doors. Everything is covered with dirt. It blows on us all the time. And that's with the desert relatively undisturbed. So if you start, bulldozing the dunes, which they have to do to build upon them, and building roads and disturbing the desert, I think we're going to have an enormous problem. Dust and sand, and the rates of asthma and lung disease in the South Valley are already highest of any group in the state, as I understand it, and this would make that worse. So that's one small thing that nobody wants us to bring up or talk about. The other thing is transportation. When I moved out here, the South Valley was very lowly populated. Roads were not congested. But I'm here to tell you that right now, the closest major intersection to my house at peak hours, I can't get out of my neighborhood. I can sit for 20 minutes and not be able to get off the road that takes me out of my neighborhood. And that's on the days, well, when school is on, it's also the main route where Rio Grande High School opens it up to. So that's 4 peak times a day. When you count school letting in and out. So roads are a big problem. The roads out here, as in much of the county, as I understand it, are in bad condition. The intersections are not, from the traffic impact analysis studies that I've read, the intersections are not functioning well, and I don't think they are. And yet the developers, as I understand it, are not being tasked with doing anything to upgrade or help the intersections in the surrounding area. Their traffic will pour out of Santolina if it gets built onto the roads where people right now are already standing at gridlock. And I've asked and asked and asked, I see no solutions being offered to this transportation problem. And it is a problem. If you can't get out of your neighborhood, then a fire truck can't get in, or emergency equipment cannot get into a neighborhood. And it's just a major bad thing as far as I'm concerned. That's roads. So I've got dust and I've got roads, and I'm sure there's a bunch more, but that's a good beginning, don't you think?
What about waste disposal? Can anybody comment on that?
Well, the plan, Paul, for the wastewater is to send it down to the treatment plant in Albuquerque South Valley. Now, the problem is that plant and the sewer lines that lead to it don't have any capacity. So there's a complex plan that the Water Utility Authority offered, which was for Santolina to basically pay for water reuse infrastructure. They would treat sewage higher up on the west side, transport that water to parks and golf courses and turf, places where potable water is not needed, freeing up enough capacity for Santolina for them to put their wastewater in the sewer and send it onto the south. I don't know about the solid waste. We have huge solid waste problems. We generate so much of it, it would add to it. But, I think one of the most extractive things about this development, in addition, besides the water situation, is the extraction of financial resources from all levels of government. The developers are actively seeking subsidies and tax write-offs and all sorts of things. You know, they say that there would be no net cost, but that's not been shown at all.
Mhm. Okay. So this
If
is
I
a
could,
question. Go ahead, Marcia.
sorry, Paul, I can speak a little
Okay.
bit to the waste disposal
Sure.
issue. It's part of what we're arguing about upcoming on August 16th is part of the new proposed development is to possibly put a big landfill on a portion of the Santolina property. Now, the developers have been a little inconsistent about whether or not that's part of their plan. I think every time they name a landfill, a lot of folks get worried about what that might look like and how that will impact them. And so then they backpedal and say, oh, no, we're not proposing a landfill. And we've seen many iterations of the current plan that's going to be heard on the 16th. And they have now reintroduced the option for a landfill as a possible land use for this particular part of the plan area. So it's talked about, but there's no clear plan about where solid waste will actually be going.
So this question is for any of you. This development seems to resurrect itself time after time. What is the history of decisions on the development, and who are the bad actors responsible for this seemingly indestructible development? They must hold important influence with both political parties.
Can I take the first crack at that just initially?
Yeah.
The history of the decisions regarding this development go like this. And Santolina asks for something, they get it. They ask for something else, they get it. They ask to change that something else, they get it. We appeal it, we lose. And this has just been going on now since 2014. We have won what I consider as a win, a total of one thing with the county regarding Santolina. Everything else has been a loss. We've taken them to district court, several cases to district court. We've been in the Court of Appeals, and we continue to get turned down, or we continue to lose. But we're still here, and we're not going away because fundamentally this thing is not in the best interest of the people who live in this area. It just isn't, and so we keep fighting it.
Maslyn, maybe you can comment on this. If the commission rejects this latest effort next week, next week, is that it? Are we done with Santolina once and for all, or will there be a next hearing and another trial?
I wish we would be done with Santolina once and for all, but no. So the hearing this next week will be on amendments to level A, so a base level master plan for Santolina that's already been approved. So that plan already exists, and they're trying to change it to allow for what they're proposing in the second plan that will be heard next week, which is the level B, sort of second level plan. And if next week the Board of County Commissioners decides to affirm the County Planning Commission's decision to deny both the amendments and the proposed level B plan, all that's really going to do is send the developers and the county staff back to, not the drawing board, but back to the original plans to try to figure out another way to do things. Yeah. So yeah, and in the absence of next week, I think we can all just anticipate additional level B plans, and then what comes after that are level C plans, and it's definitely nowhere near over, but we'll be there.
Okay, yeah, I'm guessing Marcia will be too.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah. You can't stop me.
Just a guess. Norm, you see this kind of water grab from developers and industry all the time. We have a finite amount of diminishing water resources that won't be replenished quickly. We must learn to live within those limits. What does that mean for New Mexico development going forward? Do we simply have to learn to live within Mother Nature's limits?
Well, the short answer to your question, Paul, is if we don't learn to live within Mother Nature's limits, our grandchildren and great-grandchildren are not going to have any water. And New Mexico will have tremendous water insecurity and economic insecurity, I would think, as well.
Okay. For those of you out there who haven't read the book,
And even as communities.
Oh, you froze there for a second. I thought you were done, Norm. Go ahead. Finish your thought.
We have to learn with Mother Nature's limits, and Mother Nature's limits include at least a third of our water supply disappearing within the next 50 years. And I think it likely could be more than that. So the water grab, this was all speculative. That land would have been developed already if there was any water under the ground. There isn't. It's no good. There were out-of-state developers that bought this land. It transferred in bankruptcy. A London bank bailed it out. And people are still trying to make money off the idea. And to do that, they require water.
Okay, well, we'll get back to that in just a minute. We're about out of time for the radio show, and I want to thank our guests for being here. We're going to continue to have this conversation for our YouTube recording that you can get at our Retake Our Democracy website. And I also want to let you know that next week, I'm going to be interviewing Dar Jamail, internationally known climate author and friend. He's the author of The End of Ice, which, if you want to read a dystopian book about what's coming, that's a good place to start. So join us next week, and I want to thank our guests for being with us. This is retakeourdemocracy.org. Please stay active, stay healthy, but most of all, it's so important to stay active these days. It's the only way we're going to solve this mess, and it is a mess. Thank you. Okay, I should have told you we needed to be quiet for about 5 or 10 seconds so that KSFR could figure out where I broke the show. And I did it right on time. Oh. They don't hand out bonuses, but if you go way over, they really get down on your case. So let's get back to our conversation about Santolina. Maslyn, I was under the impression that on March 2nd, the Bernalillo County Planning Commission had rejected the proposals submitted by developers and that there was no appeal. So why is the county commission even considering this now?
Paul, you're asking the good questions. So the county seems to be relying on a specific.
I'm going to get rid of my video in hopes that this improves the quality. Right now, Maslyn is frozen solid. All of you are. Glad this didn't happen during the radio show. Our retake viewers are more forgiving. Can you hear me? Nod your head if you can. All right, you're frozen.
Right.
Yeah.
We're back on being recorded.
We're being recorded and Paul's back.
Wonderful.
I don't see him.
Paul, you're muted.
He is muted, but he's here. Maybe.
Okay, so we're back. Apologies to the retake folks. Glad it didn't happen during the radio show, but my internet is not stable, and that's very unusual. This is the first time this has actually ever happened in 6 years. So let's, you just said I asked a really good question, Maslyn, and then all hell broke loose.
Okay.
So why are we having this hearing if the board had, the planning commission had rejected Santolina's plans?
Yeah. So the county seems to be relying on some zoning ordinances that support its position that an appeal of the denial, the CPC's recommendation of denial of these plans wasn't necessary because the county planning commission doesn't have final decision-making authority on these plans. We've disagreed with that position and have argued and continue to argue that the denial should either be adopted as the final decision because it hasn't been appealed, or that the plan should go back to the county planning commission entirely and reheard before the CPC, because the plans that are going to be presented on August 16th are actually different than the ones that the county planning commission denied back in March. So, our position is that the county is not following their own articulated procedures And we can only really speculate as to the why of that, but I will say that that's not really something new for the public to have to figure out what can and can't be done and when it can be done and all that. So
Where there's a will, there's a way. I think that's maybe what's going on here. Can you lay out the date and time and location for the meeting and where folks can get more info on Santolina, Maslyn?
yeah, so for the August 16th meeting, Paul, is that what you're
Correct.
asking
Yes.
about? So that meeting should be hybrid, meaning it'll take place on Zoom and in person. We'll see how that actually ends up happening. But it'll be Tuesday, August 16th at 2 p.m. There's both the Zoom link should be posted on the Bernalillo County Commission's meeting agenda, which will go out, I think, on Friday, next Friday at 4:30 p.m. And
Or for
then
those of you who are watching this on Saturday, that means it came out yesterday. It's hard to juggle these times.
No, next week.
No, but we're talking, they're going to be hearing this next Friday, next Saturday. So if it would be next week, it would actually be the day prior.
before, yeah, yes.
I'm so confused. Okay.
So I should just look at an actual calendar.
And Retake Our Democracy will post all this information in alerts as well.
Wonderful. So 16th, 15th, 14th, 13th, 12th. So August 12th at 4:30 p.m. will be the date that the Zoom link goes out to everyone. We do know they're limiting in-person capacity. So if folks do plan to attend in person, they should have a backup plan potentially in case there's not enough space for everybody. But in person, it'll be at the Ken Sanchez Commission Chambers, which is 415 Silver, I believe, Southwest in Albuquerque, on the first floor of the Bernalillo County building at Alvarado Square. So that's where the hearing itself will be held.
Okay, you said something about a Zoom, but I had read that they had denied that they were going to use Zoom. Is that, have they rescinded that denial?
That was the issue, the last round of all of this. So this hearing was originally scheduled on June 28th. And we, the Law Center, and a lot of members of the Anti-Santolina group requested either a hybrid
I got it, but I didn't pay attention. Really?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't define that, did they?
Nope.
Well, we may get there and find out that they want a person sitting in every third seat or something, or every third row, which
Yeah.
would, it's a smaller auditorium than the last one. It holds fewer than 200 people.
We'll see.
Well, get there early if you want to see it, I guess, is what that says.
Welcome back, Paul.
Yeah, so I lost you there for a bit. Everybody froze and then the whole thing started over, but miraculously it continued recording, I think. So I don't think we lost what you were commenting on, but we're about out of questions anyway. So I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to do this and apologize about the internet problems, but this stuff just happens. We do Zoominars where we have hundreds of people on, and that has never, I should not say that has never encountered anything like this. But again, thank you for not just for being here with us today, but for the work you're doing. This is valiant work, trying to put up with the shenanigans of the politicians and the developers. It's capitalism at its worst. And Retake has long taken the position that we need to learn to live within our means, and that growth is not a given, and that in fact growth is the problem. Development and profit and capitalism would have us march to our deaths, and Norm is right. We're going to be out of water. We're going to have nothing here. And so I mentioned Dar Jamail being on next week, and his book, The End of Ice, as being dystopian. But if you really want to get into dystopian, the Ministry of Fear, for the Ministry for the Future, and it should be the Ministry for Fear, is just a brilliant book. It starts off with what I think New Mexico could be looking at in some distant future, not too distant future. And that was in India, where they were experiencing a heat wave and ran out of water, and millions of people died. This is a futuristic story. It's not that it has happened. It's that's the novel. It's a projection. And it's just a brilliant book about the lack of response and the lack of proactivity on the part of our leaders who know the facts and just don't do anything about it. They won't make the compromises or the concessions they need in order to address what we're facing. And it's thanks to people like you who hold people accountable and give us any hope at all. So thank you very much for being with us today.
You're welcome, Paul.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.